Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight we are looking at the band Helix. I want to welcome Martin Popoff and Tim Durling to the show. We're going to look at those Capitol records. The original idea was to look at those first 3 Capitol Helix albums, but heck, we opened it up a little bit more than that. This is a great episode. It's a lot of fun. No one's talking Helix, kids, but we are on Grant's Rock Warehouse. So without any further ado, let's get this one started. Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and I want to welcome Martin Popoff and Tim Durling to the episode. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the band Helix. Now, you know, on this channel, we like to look at these bands that are kind of unknown, kind of obscure. Helix in the States really never took off. I think they were much more popular in Canada. Here, they were just kind of blip on the screen. I know some of these bands don't like it if I use the term blip on the screen, but seriously, this band just was kind of unnoticed. They never really took off. So most people probably in the United States, I know it was a hit in Canada, was the song Rock You, which was on their second Capitol album. What we're going to do here is kind of look at I threw it out to the panel that we'd look at their first 3 Capitol records. Now, they got signed to Capitol like 83. Yeah. They had 2 independent records out prior to that, but they got signed to Capitol. Before that, where they were pretty much just like a garage band, but they reinvigorated themselves into like a metal band. Totally transformed themselves. If you look at the artwork, I must say the artwork on those Capitol albums is just spectacular. The logo, the artwork. Martin, you probably can throw something up there while I'm talking.
Yeah, so I was just looking at my copy of the first Capitol album, No Rest for the Wicked. So there's your artwork. Yeah, it's a good kind of well put together Ozzy Osbourne type. There you go, with the Walk in the Razor's Edge on the back.
Yeah.
You've got a little picture of them on a nightstand. But I was just looking at it because mine's an import copy, and I'm trying to figure out where the heck it's from. It's bizarre that I have an import of this, and I'm just trying to find the country on it. It's thin vinyl and everything, but I'm not seeing. Oh, there we go, UK. So it's a UK.
It's just a UK pressing. All right, cool.
Pretty weird.
Well, it's just the fact that, you know, here's the Rock Candy reissue. Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to say here is look at this. This has a making of a great band. You think this would have taken off. Look at the logo. Look at the album artwork. It's got everything on here that says success. Here we go. There's beautiful. That's like the 4th record. Yeah.
So
look at this. The second Capitol. Yeah, look at the second Capitol album.
Yeah. And look at the band on the back of this. I mean, talk about ready to rock.
Right. Yeah. So, like I said on my channel, I like to look at these bands that really never really took off here in the States. So, Helix is a perfect example. So, like I said, I've got Martin here and I've got Tim Durling here. I guess I'll throw it over to Tim Durling to start us off. So what I asked them to do, we can touch on the first 2 independent records, but let's talk about those 3 Capitol records that really kind of, solidified the band. I mean, that's where they really came together. Yeah, look at this, what Martin's showing. That's them as a bar band pretty much.
Yeah.
But you look at these Capitol albums, it's like a totally different band, you know?
Yeah, you got some mustaches here. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't look like a metal band. They look like your typical 70s, you know, maybe a Southern rock band, you know, maybe a little Molly.
It looks Southern rock to me.
You know, look going on there. Mm-hmm. And the music was, I think Martin would agree with me. I mean, it's not metal in the least. Maybe it is a little Southern rocky in places, even though they're from Kitchener, Ontario.
You definitely had this in Canada. You had a bunch of these bands that had this sort of dated 70s vibe that was, not very commercial. It was a little behind the times, even when they were doing it. There were a bunch of them. We had this CanCon thing. I'll let Tim explain. He knows a little more about this. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about, these Canadian bands in that era.
CanCon is an expression that, anybody that's worked in the media in Canada knows all about. which is a law that the CRTC, the Canadian Radio Television Communications Agency, enacted. I think it was in 1970 or 1971. And the idea behind it was to give Canadian acts a leg up on radio and get play. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't get play. So it's very controversial. There's lots of pros and cons to it. Famously, Bryan Adams was on record as saying he felt it promoted mediocrity. And there was a whole thing in '91 when he started working with Mutt Lange where his albums were not considered Canadian content, which is like, how is that? That doesn't even make any sense. So, and what you had were an awful lot of bands that sprang up, and a lot of times they would put out singles and they'd be covers. They'd be covers of famous songs that American or UK artists would do. Not for every Rush. There was I can't even think of any of the bands, but
Mad Cats, Hellfield, Hammersmith. All the H's, right? Who was the other H band?
I wasn't even thinking anywhere near that heavy. I was thinking like that because I used to do a Solid Gold show, and there'd be bands like Copper Penny and
Roxy. The Bob Segarini things, the Greg Godovitz things. Of course,
exactly.
Greg
Godovitz.
Heavy band.
That song, there's actually a song that I didn't know until Helix did it. That used to come up all the time by a guy named James Leroy. It was called Touch of Magic. Helix actually covered that. I'd never heard of it. But
the Whackers, the Whackers are all part of that whole thing. Yeah.
Put Cold Water, the original band that did Make Me Do Anything You Want.
The pre-Lover Boy band, I think they were called Scrub Along Joe, something like that.
Wow. Yeah. See, that's not even.
There was Rabbit. Yeah. Later, there was Queen City Kids, and we've got our head pins, Toronto.
Head pins. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, when you get into bands like Headpins, you're getting into somewhat more recognizable names. But believe me, Grant, there were a ton. And Helix. I mean, Helix actually formed in '76. I mean, these guys they paid their dues. I mean, they were road dogs, and they put out independent albums at a time when not every band did. But getting back to the CanCon thing for a second. To qualify for Canadian content, it wasn't just as simple as you're a Canadian act. Well, no, it was the MAPLE format, MAPL, music, artist, production, lyrics. If you had half of that, then it qualified as Canadian content. So if some American act did a Neil Young song, that was Canadian content. For example, the yacht rock classic Lot of Love by Nicolette Larson. That's Canadian content because it's a Neil Young written song. So music and lyrics are completely Canadian, even though the production and the artist isn't. Nazareth, This Flight Tonight, to this day, gets a ton of airplay here in Canada on classic rock stations because it's a Joni Mitchell song, right? I mean, it's a great song and a lot of people know it, but it's one of the reasons why, as Martin can attest, Nazareth, we're huge here.
I didn't know that was. I didn't know that song qualified for CanCon. I had no idea, but they were huge here. I always thought they were huge here because A&M Canada always did a good job for their bands, right?
I think it was both, but the fact that when you have that MAPL, the M and the L are solidly Canadian. There's no co-writing there, so because Joni Mitchell was solidly Canadian, their cover of This Flight Tonight counts as CanCon every time it gets played. Every time you hear Tesla's version of Signs. That's Canadian content because it was written by Les Emerson, 5-man electrical band. There's another Canadian band that sprang out of nowhere and then disappeared. But yeah, it's a weird thing. And then you get funny situations where, like the Bryan Adams situations where you have Canadian artists who don't have enough of the MAPL to classify. If you record outside of Canada, if you co-write with a non-Canadian, it's a really weird system, and it's kind of outmoded. I'm sure it did help some of my favorite bands get noticed that otherwise wouldn't have, maybe even Helix being one of them. But yeah, they were a product of that. And I will say this, that Helix put out independent albums when not everyone did. They put them out themselves. H&S Records, which I think was H was Helix and S was William Sipe, their manager. I always assumed that's what the S stood for. But you get to the second album in '81, White Lace and Black Leather, starting to look a little bit more hard rock, and a band on the back looked a little more hard rock. Brian Bulmer there in the middle doing his best Lemmy impression, I think.
Yeah,
And
no offense, but you wouldn't think that's the same guy that appeared on those later
oh
Capitol.
no, like it's a totally different look. You know, the hair's just down. Some of the band
look
members
at
are
that.
different, but a
Nice.
lot of the band members were the same. You know, like you got the Paul Hackman, sadly passed away in '92, it was an accident. Brian Vollmer and Brent Dorner on guitar. So those three were in the band's, you know,
Right.
most well-known period. The rhythm sections would change over the years. But yeah, when they signed to Capitol in '83, I mean, it wasn't just Capitol in Canada, and that's another thing that comes up sometimes. And Martin has talked about that too, where bands will sign to CBS Canada or Capitol Canada, which means their albums don't. Yeah, they're on a major label, but they're not really. Like they're not. You can't get their albums in the States. So you could be, you know, a household name for a couple of years in Canada and not get arrested in the States. And that happened to a lot of bands too. But in Helix's case, no, they signed a worldwide deal. And they had lots of touring. I mean, they toured with a lot of big bands.
Oh my God.
And honestly, I thought that they were bigger than they were because they presented themselves as this arena ready, stadium ready rock band. And I think they, you know, for the most part, they had the songs to match. You know, there's like a lot of bands, there's so many reasons why things don't click into place. I think in the case of Helix, it was they didn't have high powered management. You know, they weren't in the faces of the American label at all times. I don't know. Martin might know a little bit more about that.
And not only did they not move to LA, they were from Kitchener, which is a small town, you know,
they didn't even move to Toronto to
back then Kitchener's was under probably 100,000 people. It's a city about an hour and 10 minutes down the highway from Toronto, right? So they're kind of like from a regional, you know, semi-big city down the road. But that too.
But you do mention that they never went
Montreal or Vancouver, or like one of the big cities, right?
Yeah, but you do mention they never moved to California. But if you look at the marketing and what Capitol did with them and the design, well, I'm just surprised they never really took off, even though they never moved to California. You know, Rush never moved anywhere. I'm just saying, I just don't know why these guys really never took off. It just seems like everything was properly in place, but you know, a lot of this you just can never explain. I don't know.
Well, a lot of it, there were just a lot of bands, you know, and there were
a lot of competition.
A lot of competition, only so many radio slots, only so many video slots. Yeah, they got radio play, they got video play, they were played on MTV. I mean, in Canada, Much Music played them all the time. Like, that's another reason, you know, Much Music was very supportive of Canadian artists, and they played them every bit as much as they would play Motley Crue, you know, Iron Maiden, you know. So I always thought in my mind that they were this big rock band for a long time, and in reality, it's not quite like that. They came close at times, but they never really broke, you know, to become headliners on their own outside of Canada. And even in Canada, I don't think they ever played really big places on their own. I could be wrong about that. Maybe in the mid 80s they played like the Gardens, but
I just know that they opened up for tons of people. Kiss, Aerosmith, Rush, Motley Crue, Alice Cooper. The list goes on. But No Rest for the Wicked came out in '83. It hit the Billboard charts here in the States at 186. So that's not a very good showing, but I don't know. What's your guys' thoughts of this record?
Well,
Capitol,
okay.
They spent a little bit of money. I mean, they even got the logo. I don't know if you can see that or not. They got
logo, and they brought out the rainbow label. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to frame this album a little bit, it's interesting. So at the time, we felt this as well. So I remember feeling about this album that it felt a little hobbled CanCon-y, like it was a little bit pushed in it, and they weren't quite that great. And the interesting thing about this album is I really get the feel of heavy Sammy Hagar about it. I get this feel of it's not quite proper hair metal yet. Granted, I mean, we are talking March 1983, so this is really early for hair metal. But we just did a show on Rat last night comparing the catalog. Rat was the band that was head and tails above the competition. But you know, this honestly This record is not particularly dated or behind the times compared to, say, Quiet Riot's Mental Health or the second Twisted Sister album. It sort of fits in that range. It is behind the times compared to either the first Dokken or the second Dokken, Tooth and Nail. But yeah, you've got Does a Fool Ever Learn on here by Eddie Schwartz, which is very Sammy Hagar rock, just thumping Midwest hard rock, right? It's got another one later on. In Don't Get Mad, Get Even by Lisa Dalbello. So it's got the two covers. And yeah, there you go. And that one is the same thing, the thumpy, the big bass line. So it's a little bit it's a little bit Triumph. It's a little bit late 70s sort of vibe. And the rest of it is kind of interesting. It really is super commercial, Twisted Sister, kind of like Dumb Kiss, sort of. Very, very party hardy hair metal with a great like a very noisy, distorted, boomy production sound by Tom Tremuth. I know Tom.
It's a weird production sound.
Yeah, it's quite extreme for hair metal. I mean, Quiet Riot Mental Health is pretty dirty as well, that whole Spencer Proffer sound thing. But this is a little bit like that, but it's definitely boomy and flappy on the bass drum. Like it's noisy, right? And then on top of that, you think of a reason why maybe they didn't make it. Brian Vollmer's a pretty extreme vocal fry kind of singer. He's a trained singer. He teaches vocals, I believe, or used to. But it's so he's really good. But he's got a really manly voice, right? And he's got the dark hair and stuff. So he's not the pretty boy hair metal guy. He's more of like the rough, aggressive rocker guy. But yeah, you listen to a bunch of these riffs on here, and it's pretty interesting how it is. It is the transition album. It's a world away from that. By the way, I always take this opportunity. Billy Oxygen on that first album is absolutely fantastic. Yeah. What a classic, interesting, cool song. It's almost like a cross between Sweet Action, Ram Jam, Black Betty, and Bohemian Rhapsody, with a little Southern rock thrown in as well. It is really cool. And Blood Rock.
And if you heard it in isolation, you would never know it was Helix. I don't think
it doesn't sound like the old Helix or the new Helix.
Yeah. Does Brian even sing that one? Because I know Brett Dorner sings some of the songs.
Oh, I'm not sure. I never really
I know he sang Crazy Women, so he might sing Billy Oxygen too.
Sounds like Brian to me.
It
I don't know.
Be. Brian's vocal style changed a lot too. I think he's a great, perfect for this kind of commercial hard rock.
Yeah.
He's very shouty, and the other thing is that it's a cavernous type of production. And you hit upon something that may have been part of the reason why they've never really took hold. A lot of covers, not just covers of well-known songs, but songs brought in by other songwriters. So the first song on this album, Does a Fool Ever Learn? That's
not Eddie a lot Schwartz. Of covers. It's the covers are the put out as singles.
They're the
big songs.
Yeah. So Does a Fool Ever Learn is written by Eddie Schwartz. If that name sounds familiar, he wrote Hit Me With Your Best Shot, which back to that CanCon thing. When you hear Pat Benatar Hit Me With Your Best Shot, that's CanCon. Because Eddie Schwartz is Canadian. He also wrote, there was the Paul Carrack song, Don't Shed a Tear. That was a big pop hit. He wrote that song. So it's definitely the poppiest thing on the album. Yeah, Don't Get Mad, Get Even, Lisa Dalbello, and I think Tim Thornton, who went on to become a country singer in the 90s in Canada. And Dalbello, I mean, she was kind of a unique artist. She was almost like not a Kate Bush, but kind of in that alt rock range. She originally wrote and recorded the song Going to Get Close to You, which Queensryche fans will know that song. And her version's actually, if you hear her version, it doesn't sound that different than what Queensryche did. But I digress. The best known song on this album is probably Heavy Metal Love, which is every bit as 1983 fun, dumb, and stupid as it sounds like. But it became, one of their early anthems. I mean, it's right there as far as dumb on the dumbness chart. It's no dumber than Lick It Up, or Bang Your Head. I mean, it's right there with that kind of mind.
Or Sammy Hagar, or the second Twisted Sister album. Those mid-paced, lock,
heavy metal.
But Tim, where would you put it on the Poison scale?
It's not glammy in the least. It's more, the early bands like Quiet Riot, Twisted Sister, Rat, they were heavier. than the Poison and then Warrant and the bands that followed. So Dumbness, well, it might be on par, but because I mean, if you listen to the riffs, they're pretty easy. I mean, there's not a lot of riffing per se. There's more just big blocky chords.
You know what?
This was a new kind of music then, so there's kind of a difference there.
Well, I'm just curious.
4 years later, sort of thing.
Yeah,
I find this fascinating because they were basically a bar band prior to this.
Oh
They
yeah,
got signed to Capitol. They were, put in a blender and remixed, and here's what we got. We've got a metal band. I'm just curious about that transition. Do either of you guys know anything about how that happened?
Well, the second album, White Lace and Black Leather, is a little bit heavier than the debut. It may not have been recorded heavy. And there's a fantastic song on that album called Breaking Loose. Yeah. And this leads into so their first album is called Breaking Loose. There's a song on the second album called Breaking Loose. The second album is called White Lace and Black Leather. There's a song on No Rest for the Wicked called White Lace and Black Leather. It also has a title song, No Rest for the Wicked, so I guess everything lines up at that point. But it's funny how they did that. But Breaking Loose, there are songs on the second album that, given the Tom Tremors treatment, would probably sit on either No Rest for the Wicked or Walk in the Razor's Edge.
So do you think this was a natural progression from the second album to the third album?
I think so. I think that by the time they recorded their first album, some of those songs, I could be wrong, but some of those songs might have been 3 or 4 years old. So they may have already, because I remember, like, Brian put out an autobiography, and I think in 2005, called Gimme an R, which if you can get past it severely needs edited for spelling and grammar. But anyway, that's just something I noticed. But it's a great read, and it's a great, survival story of a bar band just crisscrossing Canada coast to coast, in winter and in all kinds of bad weather, staying at crummy hotels. And he talked about first discovering AC/DC. And, when that came along, that was a new type of music. People had never heard anything quite that.
Right.
Talk about raw
True.
And a vocal that just demanded your attention. I think that was a huge influence on their writing. I don't think there was anything contrived about them going metal. I think that they were heading there because the name always sounded metal, but I mean, there was definitely some visual transitions, because look at the way that, their early logo was like this lowercase thing.
Looks kind of happy and,
like they look, Brian's got like a sports jersey on and they got mustaches. So then, you get up here and they have a very metal logo.
Yeah, but what a great logo.
I used to draw that on school. I draw that all the time, that Helix logo with the connecting H and X. And they're still in transition image-wise. By the time you get to Razor's Edge or Walk at the Razor's Edge, I'd say the transition's there. I'll show you. This is a UK single for Gimme Gimme Good Lovin' and When the Hammer Falls. But they look very, very competitive.
They look a lot different. They look
ready to compete with the Rats and the Twisted Sisters of the world, for sure. Right. There you go. Same photo section, I would say. Actually, what you have there is the back pictures on the back cover, I believe. It's just all together. Yeah. Mine are all
Candy. They're all in one picture because they broke it up.
And those are absolutely costumes made by a costume designer. Like doubt about it. Like an LA whatever,
For some reason,
literally Greg's costume is a yellow version of that's exactly like Daryl's and Brent's. So those guys are completely matching. Brian's put in yellow, but he's got a distinct costume, and Paul's got a distinct costume. So the whole thing is planned to the hilt, right? And really good photo sessions,
And the cover art.
Yeah.
It just screams by me, you know?
Well, this is by far the most popular Helix album. I mean, it did go platinum in Canada. Now, the sad thing is, it is their highest charting album in the States, but it only peaked at number 69. And I was really surprised to read that. I thought this would have gotten close to the top 50. I didn't think it'd be a gold record or anything, but I didn't think it was. So, they just didn't sell records in the States.
It went 400,000 copies nationally,
And
100,000 in Canada.
Just to frame what this one sounds like, this sounds like the very best writing from the first one amped up. Like every song is just an improvement over the old one. The production is still pretty extreme and pretty noisy, but you've got gang vocals and anthemic stuff on here. You've got a cover of a bubblegum song, but it sounds like a good heavy song. That's your Gimme Gimme Good Lovin'.
Yeah.
But yeah, great guitar tone, My Kind of Rock. You've got the good ballads. So this, like Rat, they do a pretty good job with the ballads. They pick good songs if they're covers, or if they write them themselves. They've got heavy parts. They're dark. They're interesting. So they have high quality ballads. But and yeah, Rock You was written by Bob Halligan Jr. And there's the famous Trailer Park Boys episode where Ricky kidnaps Alex Lifeson. And he's got him all wrapped up sitting on the couch, and he's got a guitar with him, right? And he says, play Rock You. And Alex goes, that's Helix. So
that episode was that's that was the one where Bubbles anybody that's never watched Trailer Park was Bubbles wanted to go see Rush but couldn't for some reason, and so because of something Ricky did, I think. So yeah, they kidnap Alex Lifeson, but Ricky says something about Rush. I don't get Rush. They talk about like left and right sides of the brain. You go to see Helix, say, give me an R, and then Bob's like, I ain't give nobody an R. And I think that's why Brian, because that had happened, I think that's why Brian called his book "Give Me an R." It's to us that grew up in Canada. For me, it was among like one of the first quote unquote heavy metal songs I ever heard on the radio, along with "We're Not Gonna Take It" and "Come On, Feel the Noise." I mean, it was an anthem, right? I mean, you'd have to be, you hear it once and you know how it goes. And so Bob Halligan Jr., I mean, people know his name, from Priest. He co-wrote with Kiss a little bit, with Kix, I think. He's got a pretty long resume of co-writes. And it wasn't their highest charting song in Canada, but it's definitely their calling card song.
Yeah. And the thing is that they're still a dumb band. They're still kind of in that Kiss Twisted Sister Quiet Riot zone. Certainly, actually, by this point, they're really sounded like condition critical Quiet Riot in a lot of ways. So they're moving in lockstep with Quiet Riot in a weird way, right? But the interesting thing is that they absolutely, Grant, just this totally speaks to your point. This album should have been huge. Like this, everything about this is like a world-beating hair metal album of the early exciting days of hair metal, right? This is like totally competing with your Dawkins and Great Whites and all that. And that little bit of stupidity to it is actually kind of charming. So as you go from those first two H&S albums, you've got very 70s sort of albums. You get to the first Capitol, and you got this weird hybrid where you could say, 30-40% of it sounds kind of barroom 70s rock. Now at this point, it's still there, but it's now down to about
it's
10%.
Amped up,
it's
though.
Just a little bit. There's a shuffle boogie on here, Animal House, and just some really Make Me Do Anything You Want is like I say, it's a ballad, but it's kind of Southern rocky as well. You've got some kind of boogie rock on here. 6 Strings, 9 Lives is a awesome chugging sort of party metal tune. You Keep Me Rocking, dark ballad, and that one reminds me a little bit of that whole Rock Hard Ride Free, Night Comes Down, Priesty sort of thing. Like it's got a little bit of that moodiness and some quiet.
Again, same year, right? Like same word.
Yeah. But we don't have like that album is really, really badly and dated in its production.
Well, I was gonna kind of bring that up.
This is just gritty. This is just gritty and cool and party and rock and rollsy and beer drinking production.
But how is this record dated?
Well, the only way this is dated, by its dumbness, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit by that 10% 70s-ness still in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the fact that, I mean, it's alive as far as as opposed to not dated, is that you go see Helix in concert and you're going to hear more songs from this period than anything else. So Martin, it's interesting. Like this is when I became aware of Helix, when Rock You came out, but I was 10. I thought they were a brand new band. At this point, they're pushing 30, right? On average. Were you aware of them when those independent albums came out, or did you find out about those later?
Found out about those later. I don't know why I missed them. They must have had bad distribution. I actually saw Helix live, weirdly enough, with my brother when I was going to UBC, and they actually came and played UBC. And I'm trying to figure out when that was. Well, that has to be, boy. No, I maybe I wasn't at UBC because they had either the first or second album out, and all I remember is they had that acrobatic and choreographed thing going like Scorpions. Like they were athletic on stage. They were amazing and really good players. And Brian is just an incredible singer. And when you're that road tested and you're that talented and that good, and you have simple songs, it's like you could pull this stuff off, while thinking about your taxes up there. They were just really, really absolutely locked down. So yeah, everything, Grant, back to your point, everything about this band right at this point is like they should have been massive.
Yeah, they should have been. Okay, so if we look at this record and we look at this, which record of those two records, is there a preference? Do you think one record seems to date better than the other?
Oh, I think Razor's Edge has stood the test of time.
Okay.
More. They're very similar album. Yeah. I just think that it's almost like No Rest for the Wicked is a trial run for what Walking the Razor's Edge would be. They're very similar sounding albums. It's
right.
The same producer. But I just think that there's stronger songs on Razor's Edge.
Well, they're definitely hokier riffs on the first one versus the second one. The second one's just a little bit more American, right? A little bit more, up to competitive standards, I think.
Yeah, they're trying to hit that market, And like I said, I'm just surprised it never took off. So by 1985, we have Long Way to Heaven, which, again, another great album cover. It kind of reminds me of Angel a bit.
Yeah.
Except they don't have any white outfits. But
except for Brian, he's got the...
Well, he stands out. And then you look at Brian on here, and he does not look anything like he did.
Well, see, it's a little bit like Coverdale. They made him a blonde.
But yeah, yet another strong album cover. If I was going through the bins, I'd be going, "Holy crap! Look at these guys."
This was a big album in Canada, and if you're crate digging like I like to do, you come across these all the time. I mean, these obviously must have sold a lot. You find these records and these cassettes an awful lot.
You never see them here ever.
No. I mean, they were made available, but it's like how well were they distributed? Interesting thing about this album is that the bass is actually played by Spider Sinave from Streetheart and now Loverboy. He actually plays the bass on this. I don't know why. Daryl Gray's a fine bass player, but who knows?
Well, Daryl's just new to the band, right? So they must have.
Well, he joined for Razor's No Rest had that Mike Uzelac guy who went joined a religious cult or something.
Yeah,
kind of went.
Does it say? Because I noticed on the wiki it said it mentioned Spider, but it wasn't super clear on it. Does it definitely play all the bass?
Appears courtesy of Pressure Records Incorporated. It doesn't say on which tracks. It's kind of it's one of those nebulous kind of
you can't tell
really
how much
say
of it
who does what. But again, now this was third time in a row produced by Tom Tremors, but it's a little brighter sounding, and I don't know if that was by design. Like this is a little, I don't want to say lighter, but it is. It's a little lighter. It's a little less dark. It's still quite heavy in spots, and the biggest song, I guess the second biggest Helix song was probably Deep Cuts the Knife, is sort of like a power ballad, and that was it's Bob Halligan Jr., but it was co-written by Paul Hackman, so it was kind of done in-house. They had The Kids Are All Shaken, which is a total attempt at getting a radio hit in the States. It actually is The Kids Are All Shaken in the USA, and they're this Canadian band. Those two were the singles off of this.
Yeah, this thing got up to 109 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 200, so they're selling more records.
But the thing with this one, we were all really mad at the band when this came out, because this really it is lighter and cleaner and slicker. It reminds me of a little bit how that second Jackal album is a little bit of a droop from the first one. It reminds me a little bit how much I love the first two Black and Blue albums, and I don't really like the third and the fourth, Nasty and In Heat. And we thought this reminded us of Star's Attention Shopper, the dressing more civilian, right? And it looks like a Christian metal album, right? It's called Long Way to Heaven.
It looks like Angel to me.
There was a little bit of that going on with the debate about Helix, and the songs are just a little more melodic. Like Tim says, the production is much cleaner. The edges are taken away. The grit is taken away. There's more gang vocals. The gang vocals are sweeter. And we were just disappointed. It just seemed like a turn towards too much poppiness for us.
And I think this time around they also didn't get a big tour, because up until then they'd gotten some pretty good opening slots. And again, the clock. It's a little bit like Y&T. The clock was ticking against them if they hadn't really broken through by this point, because, you get up in your 30s and you're quote unquote old, right? If you haven't already broken. And I think that time was working against them at this point too. So maybe they felt a little pressure to lighten up the approach, even though Walking the Razor's Edge will remain their most successful album. And they didn't repeat that approach again. They didn't do it a third time. I mean, you do get that sort of cavernous drum sound, but overall, I don't know, maybe I'm colored by the brighter album cover, but it's a different sounding album. And Grant, Tom Tremors is not a name that I recognize a lot. So he's produced these 3 Helix albums, but he also produced the first Honeymoon Suite album. So I don't know, Martin, do you know of any other albums that he produced? Because
I'm not familiar.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think there's a Voivod or two, but he ran Hypnotic Records, and I've met him and stuff. He lived out in Hamilton, so he's like an industry guy. So he ran a label and he produced, and he was in, I want to say he was in Symphonic Slam.
Okay, so he was in a band.
Yeah, so he's a player too. And good guy, and he's done some really good productions. It's just I can't remember what they are, but he's done. I remember I was on some show and we were talking about something that sounded amazing that he produced. I can't remember what it is, but I want to mention one other thing. I compare this whole Helix narrative to Headpins, Toronto, and Kick-Axe Vices. Kick-Axe Vices kind of lines up with the whole Helix vibe, I think, as well. The whole party metal, but gritty, even though that's more of a Spencer Proffer thing. So I feel they're kind of tied up in all this as well. But just wanted to mention that.
Well, I'm just curious real quick, since we're still here. Wild in the Streets, that was produced by Mike Stone.
Well, some of it was produced. It was one of those things where, like, Mike Stone
and Neil Kernan.
Mike Stone and Neil Kernan, but I don't think they produced it together. I think Mike Stone got mad hearing somebody else's mix, and I don't know. And this one actually is one of my favorites. This one and the one that follows it, actually, I think they were getting better. I think this is way better than Long Way to Heaven. Again, there are covers on here. There are lots of covers on here, but I think they picked their covers.
See, that one
really well.
Back for Another Taste I've got on order. I have never heard that one.
This one here, it went gold in Canada. So they're best to my research, because as Martin knows, it's really hard to research certifications outside of the States. So No Rest for the Wicked eventually went gold. I think it took about 4 years. Razor's Edge and Long Way to Heaven both went platinum in Canada. Long Way went to #1 in Sweden. They always like to mention that, which is kind of weird. But that just shows you how hard they were working, and they were going into Europe and playing. And then Wild in the Streets just went gold. And I have to think Back for Another Taste has to have been close to gold, because there's a ballad on that album called Good to the Last Drop, which is actually their highest charting single. I think it went all the way to number 17. So I'm thinking that must have been in the 45,000 range in Canada, just shy of gold. But Wild in the Streets it pairs up more, I think, with Walking the Razor's Edge with slightly better production. And because it's got that party, high voltage kicks, what you bringing to the party. Give 'Em Hell. Like it's it's full of these types of songs. I think
a couple of trivia points. It's got a cover of that obscure song by Nazareth called Dream On, which is not obscure in Europe. I mean, that was a huge song for them in Europe. But so it's weird, but they cover it here. And then there's a song written by Joe Elliott from Def Leppard.
That's right. Yeah.
Tough, which was a Hysteria toss away.
She's so tough.
Yeah. So that song was, I don't know how they ended up with it, but again, and I interviewed Brian in 2009, and he actually said we weren't the most prolific band. So they're in England recording this. I think they recorded it at the Manor, and they were looking
like
for songs.
April Wine, for God's sakes.
Yeah. So yeah, Dream On, it was the second single, and it got a lot of video play here. And it was years later till number one, I realized it was a Nazareth song, and number two, I heard the Nazareth version. It's very, very faithful.
I mean, look at those guys in that picture.
Yeah, it's very spot on to the Nazareth version. It's a really, really good cover. Helix, to me, they're kind of like the Nazareth of Canada. And when I say that, I mean they're like just a dependable rock and roll band.
Mm-hmm.
They might not be your favorite, but you can depend on them to give you a good time if you're in the mood for that type of music. Yeah, She's Too Tough. It was written by Joe, and so Helix actually were the first to record it. Def Leppard didn't record it until I think 92. It was a B-side and it appeared on the Retroactive album. But Brian, like he sings it really, really well in here. But he said, I hated doing it live because it was so high. It was really, really tough for him to sing. I think maybe when we were talking about ghost studio musicians, I think maybe Mickey Curry actually plays the drums on this album. It's one
Mickey
of those situations.
Curry from Hall & Oates?
From Hall & Oates and Bryan Adams and the Cult Sonic Temple and Alice Cooper, Hey Stupid, and a ton of studio
he's
sessions.
A great drummer. I'll give him that.
I think Matt Frenette from Loverboy plays on at least one song on here. So I don't know. I've seen the band live. Fritz is a good drummer. So sometimes producers make these decisions without, I don't know, you get other people to play on the album, or like the first Cinderella album, for example. But I don't know what Brian thinks of this one, but this has always been, like, this is the first one to come out when I was actively waiting for a Helix album. So I've always really liked this one.
Okay, so Wild in the Streets, I agree with you that it definitely feels like a cross between Walk in the Razor's Edge and Long Way to Heaven, right? I think it is better production, but it does have a little more of the spirit of the second Capitol album. So I definitely like it more. Going through these albums again to prepare for this show, I spent a lot of time thinking in my head over the years. Wild in the Streets was my favorite one, but I still think the second one is my favorite one. I think that's the one where they captured the excitement, the lightning in a bottle, got it perfect. They had the most confidence they were ever going to have, and there was no second guessing sort of going on or playing to any sort of formula, although what they were doing was absolutely spot on, a certain formula in itself. But I like Tim says, I think they were totally sincere with what they were doing. So I would definitely say Walk in the Razor's Edge is my favorite, followed by Wild in the Streets, followed by, I think I'd have to go with No Rest for the Wicked, even though it is kind of frumpy, and then go Long Way to Heaven.
There you go. What about you, Tim?
I'd probably go Wild in the Streets, Razor's Edge, No Rest for the Wicked, and Long Way to Heaven.
Yeah, I was thinking about the whole thing. I like No Rest for the Wicked's my favorite. And then probably I'd go Razor's Edge. Then, well, this is hard. I kind of like
They never really did an out-and-out, like none of their albums sound dated in terms of electronic drums or overly keyboardy, or they never went that direction. So, they stand up in that way, but they are they're not exactly radio friendly productions, except maybe some of the stuff on Wild in the Streets, because it's Mike Stone, right? So he's used to White Snake and all of that,
right?
Very cliched riffs, very cliche chord changes, right?
Yeah.
All right.
You gotta know where they're going.
I'm not sure we're going to set the world on fire, but hopefully we can turn some people on to Helix to give them some more love. Like I said, that's all my channel's about, is to give some of these bands that never really took off here in the States some love. So hopefully you want to reach out. Hopefully you want to check some of these records out. That's all I care about. So I want to thank Martin and Tim for coming on tonight. God knows what we'll do next. I'm sure something. But yeah, it was a fun discussion. And all it's about is come here and talk music. That's all I want to do. So I want to thank you gentlemen for coming on. We'll see you on the next one. And please like, subscribe. You know the whole routine. Let us know if you're into Helix. You're in the States here. I don't know. Were you aware of Helix? Do you like any of these records? If you're in Canada, tell us what Helix albums you like. So on that note, I'm going to sign off. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on. It was a lot of fun.
All right.